Okay, so today we're going deep on Machtesh Ramon.
Yeah.
We've got these audio transcripts from a guided tour,
Right.
in the Negevim desert.
Okay.
So listeners, if you've ever wanted to, explore a place where you can literally see millions of years of geological history,
Oh, yeah.
this is the episode for you.
Absolutely.
We're going to be looking at how this landscape was shaped,
Uh-huh.
the people who lived and thrived here,
Yeah.
and the creatures that call this place home today.
It's really the whole package.
It is.
It's not just rocks.
It's way more than just rock.
It's history. It's culture.
Yeah.
It's even, a little bit of modern conservation.
So our mission today is to, really dig into these transcripts
Right.
and bring those insights to life for you.
And I think what's so cool about these transcripts is they give us this real on-the-ground perspective.
Yeah.
You can practically feel the desert wind and the sun on your skin
Totally.
as you listen to the guide explain things.
And I think what's really interesting is how the guide keeps referring to Machtesh Ramon as the biggest erosional crater in the world.
Right.
Now, when I hear crater, I think meteor impact.
Huge explosion.
Right, like a massive event.
Exactly.
But that's not what we're talking about here, is it?
Not at all.
So what exactly is an erosional crater?
Well, the Hebrew word for it is Machtesh.
Machtesh.
And essentially it means that this massive crater was formed not by some sudden impact,
Right.
but by the slow and steady process of erosion.
Erosion.
Yeah, water whined over millions of years, carving away at the rock.
And what's kind of mind-blowing is that Israel has more than just this one Machtesh.
Yeah, it's not a one-off.
Right. Like there's that smaller one near Dimona.
Right near Devona.
And a large one by Yerahim.
And then there are the two smaller Arif craters.
Yeah.
But those are really off the beaten path.
Oh, yeah.
The guide mentions it takes like 2 hours in a Jeep just to get there.
So 5 erosional craters in this, relatively small area.
Yeah.
Like, why?
Yeah. What is it about this region that makes it so special?
Right. What's the geological recipe for a Machtesh?
So to get a Machtesh, you need a very specific set of ingredients.
Okay.
And they have to be added in just the right order over millions of years.
Like a geological layer cake.
Exactly.
Okay. So what's the first layer?
First, you need a base of sandstone.
Sandstone.
Yeah. Picture this. Hundreds of millions of years ago, you've got these ancient rivers flowing eastward,
Okay.
carrying all this eroded material from the mountains. And they're emptying into this vast ancient ocean called the Tethys Ocean.
The Tethys.
And over time, all that sediment compresses and hardens into sandstone.
So the first ingredient, sandstone, laid down by ancient rivers.
Got it.
What's next?
Well, then the ocean level starts to rise.
Okay.
This Tethys Ocean, it starts to creep inland. And as it does, it deposits layers of limestone and chalk.
Limestone and chalk.
Yeah, classic ocean sedimentary rocks right on top of that sandstone.
So if you were standing there millions of years ago.
You'd see these distinct layers.
Right.
The harder limestone on top
And
the softer sandstone underneath.
So we've got our sandstone base and our limestone chalk topping.
Right.
What's the next step in our Machtesh recipe?
This is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
So you've got these horizontal layers of rock, right? But then around 70 to 80 million years ago, tectonic forces start to kick in.
Tectonic forces.
Yeah, these massive movements within the Earth's crust.
Oh, wow.
They cause these layers to buckle and fold and uplift.
So the land is literally being pushed upward.
Exactly.
Wow.
The guide actually uses this great analogy.
Okay.
He says, imagine baguettes of mountains.
Baguettes of mountains.
Yeah, with valleys in between.
I love that.
And Machtesh Ramon sits within one of these uplifted structures.
Okay, so the land is pushed up, creating these elevated areas.
Right.
But how does erosion then carve out a valley within a mountain?
That's where the Dead Sea Arava Rift Valley comes into play.
Okay, the Rift Valley.
So this rift, it's like a giant crack in the Earth's crust. And it creates this steep drop-off right next to our Baguette Mountains.
Okay.
And the slope, it dramatically accelerates erosion.
So like water flowing down that slope has a lot more power to cut into the rock?
Exactly.
Wow.
And over millions of years, that erosion, it starts to eat away at the highest points of those mountains.
Okay.
The softer limestone goes first.
Right.
And once that's gone, the sandstone underneath is exposed.
And sandstone erodes pretty easily, right?
Way more easily than limestone.
So the water just keeps carving downwards.
Exactly.
And eventually you get a valley within the mountain.
And that, my friend, is how Machtesh Ramon was born.
It's amazing to think about the scale of time involved.
I know, it's mind-boggling.
And all that material that was eroded away.
where did it all go,
Right,
right?
it didn't just disappear.
Well, it all ended up in the Arava Valley.
The Arava Valley.
Yeah, it's carried down that steep slope by the rift and just piled up.
And we're talking about a lot of material, right?
The guide says the Arava Valley is filled with 6 to 7 kilometers of eroded material.
6 to 7 kilometers deep.
That's like a mountain's worth of rock.
That's incredible.
It's almost like the missing mountain is still there.
Right, just in a different form.
Exactly.
And this erosion is still happening today, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
So Machtesh Ramon is still evolving.
Yeah, it's a dynamic landscape.
The guide even mentions a crack in the Bereshit Hotel
Right.
as evidence of this ongoing erosion.
Yeah, even the buildings aren't safe.
So it's not just ancient history.
It's a process that's continuing to shape the landscape.
Now, let's zoom in a little bit and talk about some of the more specific geological features within the Machtesh.
Okay.
The guide talks about mud cracks.
Yeah.
But when I hear that, I think, dried up mud puddles.
Right.
But that's not what they're talking about here, is it?
No, not exactly.
So what are these mud cracks?
Oh, they're actually a pattern of fracturing that you see in volcanic rock.
Volcanic rock.
Yeah, so imagine molten rock cooling and solidifying.
Okay.
As it cools, it contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And that contraction creates these cracks that often form polygonal shapes.
Polygonal shapes.
Yeah, like the basalt columns in the Golan Heights,
Oh, yeah.
or even like the cells in a honeycomb.
So the name is a bit misleading,
Yeah, it's not about mud at all.
but it is a cool geological feature.
For sure.
And speaking of volcanic activity,
Right?
the guide mentions finding different types of magmatic rock in the valley.
Basalt, granite, rhyolite.
Yeah, all sorts of interesting rock.
And even some metamorphic rock.
So what does that tell us about the history of this area?
Well, it tells us that there was once a lot of volcanic activity here.
Really?
Yeah, but the guide is quick to point out that the volcano is long extinct.
Okay, so no worries about eruptions.
We're safe on that front.
But the evidence of that ancient volcanic activity is still all around us.
It's written in the rocks.
Now, in the midst of all this arid landscape,
Right.
the guide points out a water spring at Ein Saharonim.
Yeah, which is also known as Neve Midbar in the Bible.
So a water source in the desert.
That's like striking gold.
Well, it must have been incredibly valuable.
Absolutely crucial for any life trying to survive in this environment.
And the guide mentions that the Nabateans,
Yeah.
the ancient people who we'll talk about more in a bit,
Uh-huh.
they definitely relied on this spring.
They were masters of water management.
And there's this interesting detail about a layer of salt
Right.
that's left behind after the water evaporates.
That's a common thing with desert springs.
Yeah, because of the dissolved minerals.
Exactly.
So let's talk about these Nabateans.
Okay.
Who were they?
Well, they were an Arab people who originated in the Arabian Peninsula,
Okay.
and they rose to prominence around the 3rd century BC.
So well before Islam.
Right.
And they were polytheistic, right?
Yes, they had their own pantheon of gods and goddesses,
Interesting.
but what they're really known for is their mastery of trade.
Trade.
Yeah, they controlled the caravan routes that crisscrossed this
And
region.
what were they trading?
All sorts of valuable goods. But their most prized commodity was incense.
Incense.
Yeah, frankincense and myrrh specifically.
And where was that coming from?
All the way from Yemen.
Yemen.
Yeah, that was the source of the best incense.
And there was a huge demand for it throughout the ancient world.
Oh yeah, it was used in religious ceremonies for medicinal purposes.
Okay.
Having as perfume.
So how were they transporting all this incense across such a harsh and unforgiving landscape?
Well, they had this incredibly well-organized network of trade routes
Okay.
that stretched from Petra.
Petra, their capital city.
Yeah, the one carved into the rock,
Right.
through the Areva Valley and all the way to the port of Gaza.
Gaza.
Yeah, on the Mediterranean coast.
So they were connecting the Arabian Peninsula to the Mediterranean.
Exactly.
And they weren't just trading incense, right?
No, they also dealt in other commodities.
Okay, like what?
Dead sea salt, for one.
Salt.
Yeah, very valuable back then.
Uh-huh.
And meat from Arabia.
Okay.
And even pepper from as far away as India.
Pepper from India.
Yeah, they had a truly global reach.
So this was a massive logistical operation,
Uh-huh.
especially considering the challenges of the desert environment.
And that's what makes them so impressive.
Right.
They were masters of survival in this harsh landscape.
So what were some of their strategies?
Well, they were incredibly skilled at water management.
Water management.
Yeah, they built these elaborate systems of channels and tunnels
Uh-huh.
to collect and conserve rainwater.
Wow.
And they also established these strategically placed caravan stations.
Caravan station.
Yeah, like rest stops for the travelers and their camels.
Makes sense.
The transcripts mention one near Machtesh Ramon,
Okay.
with walls that date back to the 2nd century BC.
Wow, so they were using this area for a long time.
For centuries.
And it's incredible to think about them navigating these vast landscapes without any modern technology.
Right, no GPS, no detailed maps.
How did they do it?
They relied on their intimate knowledge of the terrain.
So they basically memorized the entire landscape.
Yeah, the shapes of the mountains, the courses of the wadis.
Wadis!
Yeah, the dry riverbeds. And they even used the stars for navigation.
So all their navigation was in their head.
Passed down through generations.
Pretty amazing.
It was their secret to success.
So what led to the decline of the Nabatean influence in this region?
Well, the Roman Empire eventually caught up with them.
The Romans?
Yeah, in the early 2nd century AD, the Romans started to exert their control over the Nabatean kingdom.
And what did that mean for the Nabateans?
Well, the Romans recognized the value of those trade routes. So they basically took over.
And once the Romans were in control...
The Nabateans lost their monopoly.
Right.
Their main source of wealth and power.
So their culture gradually declined.
And they eventually assimilated into Roman society.
So it's a classic story of a powerful empire absorbing a smaller one.
It happens time and time again throughout history.
The transcripts also mention the UNESCO World Heritage Site designation of the incense routes and Nabatean cities.
About 20 years ago, UNESCO recognized the incredible historical and cultural significance of these sites.
And the guide even brings up a possible connection to the story of the 3 wise men.
Right, in a Christian tradition.
Yeah.
Bringing gifts of frankincense and myrrh to the baby Jesus.
And since the Nabateans controlled the trade of those commodities, it's possible that those wise men were Nabatean traders.
It's an interesting theory.
And the guide also mentions a reference to the Nabatean goddess in the Quran.
Yeah, there's a chapter where the Prophet Muhammad condemns the worship of various goddesses. And that includes Al-Uzza,
Al-Uzza,
Manat, and Alat.
And those were all important deities to the Nabateans.
Exactly.
So even their religious beliefs left their mark on history.
In a big way.
Now, what about the Bedouin people who live in the Negev today?
Right.
Is there any connection between them and the ancient Nabateans?
Some Bedouin communities believe they are descended from the Nabateans.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a strong part of their cultural identity.
But is there any historical evidence to support that claim?
Well, not really.
Okay.
But you can understand why they would feel that connection.
Right.
They're living in the same landscape,
Yeah.
facing the same challenges.
And the guide mentions something about idol worship among some Bedouin groups as recently as World War I.
Yeah, it's fascinating how these ancient traditions can persist.
Even into the 20th century.
It's a reminder that history isn't always linear.
Right?
It can loop back on itself in unexpected ways.
Now let's shift gears and talk about fossils.
Okay.
The guide mentions finding Ammonite fossils in the limestone.
Yeah.
So what exactly were Ammonites?
They were these amazing marine creatures.
Okay.
Kind of like squid, but with these coiled spiral shells.
Spiral shells?
Yeah. And they were incredibly abundant during the Mesozoic era.
So back when dinosaurs roamed the earth?
Exactly.
Wow.
There were over 30,000 different species of ammonites.
30,000.
Can you imagine?
That's incredible.
And they came in all shapes and sizes.
So how did they actually live?
Their shells were divided into these chambers.
Chambers.
And they could control their buoyancy by filling those chambers with water or air.
So kind of like a submarine.
Exactly, a shelled submarine.
That's a great way to picture it.
And they also had this tube-like structure called a siphon
Okay.
that they used for propulsion and feeding.
So they were pretty sophisticated creatures.
Oh yeah, they thrived for hundreds of millions of years.
But they're extinct now, aren't they?
Yeah, sadly.
What happened to them?
They were wiped out in the same mass extinction that killed the dinosaurs.
The asteroid impact.
Yeah, that's the most likely culprit.
So how can we find their fossils in the middle of a desert?
Well, remember how the land was uplifted and eroded?
Mm-hmm.
That process also exposed those ancient sedimentary layers where the Ammonite fossils were buried.
So it's like the earth is revealing its secrets.
Exactly.
And the guide makes this interesting point about the distribution of the fossils.
Yeah.
You won't find Ammonite fossils on the other side of the Machtesh.
Right, because that side is made up of younger rock layers.
So the Ammonites were already extinct by the time those layers were formed.
Exactly.
It's like a geological timeline laid out before us.
It's incredible.
And the guide mentions a living relative of the Ammonite.
Yeah, the nautilus.
The nautilus.
It's this deep sea creature that's still alive today.
So we have a direct link to those ancient times.
It's amazing.
Now let's talk about the creatures that call Machtesh Ramon home today.
Like the ibex.
Yeah, they're thriving here.
The guide says their numbers have really increased in recent years.
Thanks to successful conservation efforts.
That's great to hear.
It's a real conservation success story.
What's their social structure like?
Well, the females and their young live together in groups,
Okay.
kind of like a nursery herd.
Makes sense.
But the males are mostly solitary.
Solitary.
Yeah, except during mating season.
Okay, what happens then?
Things get a little competitive.
Oh.
The males fight each other for dominance.
Using their horns.
Yeah, it can get pretty intense. And how do they mark their territory?
They use pheromones.
Pheromones.
Yeah, chemical signals in their urine and droppings.
So it's a scent-based communication system.
Exactly.
And the winner of those fights gets the girls.
You could say that.
Spoils of victory.
And it ensures that the strongest genes are passed on to the next generation.
So it's all part of the natural selection process.
It's nature's way of keeping the species strong.
And how can you tell the males and females apart?
The males have these impressive horns.
Horns?
Yeah, big and curved.
Okay.
And they also have long beards.
Beards?
Yeah, they look pretty distinguished.
So long beards, big horns for the males and the females.
Smaller horns.
Yeah, okay.
And a bit rounder in the back.
Rounder?
Yeah, kind of chubby.
Chubby ibex.
Well, that's one way to put it.
And the guide also mentions a bird called the Arava bubbler.
Yeah, it's a small bird with a really long tail.
A long tail.
Yeah, they use it for displays and communication.
Okay.
And they're also known for their altruistic behavior.
Altruistic.
Yeah, they help each other raise their young.
So a bird with a flashy tail and a strong sense of community.
It's a pretty cool combination.
So Machtesh Ramon really is this amazing tapestry of life.
Yeah, past and present.
From ancient Ammonites to modern ibex.
And everything in between.
It's a reminder that this landscape is constantly changing.
Always evolving.
And that we're all part of that story.
Whether we realize it or not.
So to sum up,
Right.
what we've learned from these transcripts is that Machtesh Ramon is a testament to millions of years of geological processes,
Yeah.
a place where ancient civilizations thrived,
Yeah, the Nabateans.
and a haven for unique and resilient wildlife.
Absolutely.
And I think what's really amazing is how all these different threads are woven together.
It's the interplay of geology, history, and biology.
Right. Those aha moments were really powerful.
Yeah.
Like realizing that ancient rivers laid down the sandstone,
Right.
and that those layers were then covered by limestone and chalk from an ancient ocean,
And then pushed up by tectonic forces.
and then carved out by erosion.
It's mind-blowing when you think about it.
And the ingenuity of the Nabateans.
Yeah, surviving in such a harsh environment.
And the fossils that tell the stories of creatures from a distant past.
Like the Ammonites?
And then there's the ibex.
Yeah, real symbol of resilience.
So as we wrap up,
Mhm.
I think it's worth asking ourselves,
Yes.
what other seemingly permanent landscapes or societies around us
Yeah.
might be undergoing slow but inevitable transformations,
Right.
maybe even without us realizing it?
It's a good question to ponder.
And what secrets of water or other essential resources will shape our future?
Just like they shaped the lives of those who came before us.
It's a thought-provoking way to end our deep dive into Machtesh Ramon.
I agree.
Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.